Today's talk, we have taken a relatively simpler topic, apparently simple, but when somebody dwells on the definition of the work as defined by Sri Aurobindo or by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and then we see that how vast this crisp word actually means. And though it is considered as one of the three avenues, that is work, devotion, and knowledge, yet in the language of Sri Aurobindo and also Sri Krishna, this constitutes the foundational basis of everything else. And so I thought we will take on this particular subject. And 2, 3 months back, uh, Vaishali also suggested in one of her Sunday discussion here on Savitri that let us talk on this subject. So we took on this because it is important for the youngsters primarily. It is not true for youngsters only. It is true for all. Just now, when mother's message of 9th December was read out, your mother had said, "You who has worked so much, you who has suffered so much." And Sri Aurobindo worked without going out of his room or that building for 40 long years. So the spread and the depth of this particular term is really very great. And also, we know that Sri Krishna had said that this work is extremely complex to understand. The term work, karma, is very difficult to understand. Let us try and understand a little bit of it and go back from this particular evening gathering as to what Sri Krishna and Sri Aurobindo wanted to say. At the outset, I must also emphasize that Sri Aurobindo's work or his philosophy or what he meant was a step ahead of what Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita. We will see that at the end, but now we begin with this. Now, we had a very young seeker in Sri Aurobindo Ashram who was highly questioned by many others, but Sri Aurobindo held him in great not reverence, with a lot of love. He was Nagin Doshi. And Nagin Doshi used to write to Sri Aurobindo very regularly and used to get a huge amount of answers, which others used to envy those days, especially between 33 and 36. And in one of the letters on works, he wrote this. He said, "Most take the work as work only." Now, this is the most uh, difficult statement to fathom as to what he meant. And because we know the incident with Nirod Baran also, and Sri Aurobindo told Nirod Baran that I don't know you're working, while he was in the timber department initially, and then he was put in the library for dusting the books. And UK returned doctor. And UK returned doctor those days had different weight by itself. So most take work as work only. And obviously it means that we must not take work as only work. Now, then we'll see what is yoga. Now the spread of yoga, definition of yoga has pervaded our entire scripture. Start from Rig Veda, and come down to as recent as Sri Aurobindo, we find the definition of yoga has been of various types. We will briefly touch upon this before we get into the actual meat of the matter. In the Vedas, throughout the Vedas, especially in the Rig Vedas, the definition of work actually came in terms of sacrifice. And I have one slide from Rig Veda, one of the slokas, where this aspect will come up. We will visit that even at the end again. So Vedas talked about various types of yogas. Katha Upanishad's definition of yoga was also something very revealing. And that was a dialogue between Nachiketa and Yama. Patanjali Yoga Sutra was actually meant on one type of yoga by itself. And he defined yoga in his way that was quite different. And then we find that in Bhagavad Gita, the whole thing was very well elaborated because the context of Bhagavad Gita was in terms of work on the battlefield. So their work, intensive work and extensive work was actually required. So Gita handles that very vastly. And of course, our Sri Aurobindo handles it superbly up to supramental level. Let us briefly see uh, what these good may be, how divergent they are in various places. Some of them we know. We don't. I will not deal on Patanjali Yoga Sutra because most of us have read that many a times. But let us see what the one term on that. We'll see that. Now, Sri Aurobindo says, in the case of the Gita, he takes Gita goes to make works a distinctive characteristic of yoga. It's a highly distinctive characteristic. That means from yoga, we know that traditionally our rishis or our various sages used to go retire into the caves and do nothing except meditation. And I mean, there was no interaction with the society. There was no actual work, a physical work. But then Sri Aurobindo says Gita goes to make works distinctive characteristic of yoga. Now, yogic consciousness. What distinguishes a man who works with yogi consciousness from the one who does not have yogi consciousness? How do you say that? What is the distinction between this? Because this is the prime issue. Today's talk, this is the prime issue. What distinguishes a man who works with yogi consciousness from an ordinary person? Sri Aurobindo says the yogi abides the path of cosmic working. The cosmic working is the path by which a true yogi walks. Now, in Rig Veda, we come across this particular sloka where Varuna has been uh, Varuna has been addressed. And coming to the second line, second bullet point, O Varuna, hear, awake, make wide thy reign. May we abide in the law of thy workings. Now, if we translate that particular whole mantra or rig, it is the mass of light full of consciousness which its source above is born by Varuna, who pervades all the spreads of its, which who pervades its rays of knowledge. These stream downwards and gets established within all the seekers. We shall return to this particular thought at the end of this discussion. because we have to see how this particular thought of Rig Veda blends with our total understanding of this theme. On to Katha Upanishad, we have in the final pages, final section of the Katha Upanishad, we come across this particular wonderful sloka. Tam yoga iti manyate sthiram indriya dharnam abrahmatyam tada bhavati yoga hi prabhayo apvayu. That means the last statement is yoga is the birth of things and their endings. Yoga is birth of things and their ending. Sri Aurobindo also says to this is Sri Aurobindo's translation of that particular sloka. Anything in blue is by Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo has translated in this that yoga is birth of things and their endings. Some others have translated that comes and goes. And there are other interpretations of this particular extremely famous statement on yoga, where he says, and this is a statement by a great yogi on the banks of Narmada. He says that when a yogi breathes out, he is creating. When he breathes in, it's a dissolution. This is what Yama meant to Nachiketa. A wonderful interpretation of this is there in those books where you find the experiences of various sages on the banks of Narmada. Any Narmada Parikrama book. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, we have this famous statement. This Bhagavad Gita has got many slokas covering this aspect of yoga. What is yoga? What is karma? So it is strewn all over from first chapter to the last chapter. But perhaps this particular sloka I always found most challenging, and what is actually he wanted to mean. So he says yoga karmasya koshalam. It's the last portion, last pada of one particular sloka, 2.50. Of that, it is the last portion. He says yoga is skill in action. And that means skill in action you attain through yoga. You cannot be skillful without doing yoga. Now, what do you mean? What do we mean by this? That yoga is skill in action. What is the meaning of? We'll see these terms. What is yoga? What is skill? And what is action? Because we are talking about work in the language of Sri Aurobindo. As to how Sri Aurobindo would like to have this work. This is the thing that we are trying to address. So, yoga, skill, and action we'll understand. The most, if you read any number of Bhagavad Gita book, you will find this particular portion has been translated in various. Some say dexterity in work. Some say dexterity in work is yoga. No, it is very clear that Sri Aurobindo is not talking about a skillful, meticulous working as a suppose a neurosurgeon or a cardiac surgeon or any other people doing work. A particular cobbler stitching up the shoes. That kind of a skill he is not talking about. He is not talking about that skill. Krishna is not talking about that skill. Because that skill Arjuna had in plenty. He was not lacking that skill. So why is he saying that you be in yoga? Yogastu kuru karmani. Why does he say this? He says this because he meant by a certain amount of skill that you have to have And we'll see that because this will take us through this idea. Anytime any issues, kindly raise a question so that I also learn from that. Let us try and understand what these three terms, yoga, work, and skill, in this sloka of the Gita in certain details. Now, Sri Aurobindo says that yoga, says the Gita, is skill in work, and by this it is meant that the transformation of mind and being brought with it a perfect inner state and faculty, out of which the right principle of action and the right spiritual and divine results of works emerge naturally like a tree out of a seed. Now, where I have omitted certain portion, there he has mentioned certain things where they have been trimmed off, but this is the actual portion. It meant that the transformation of mind and the being, that when that is done, brought with it a perfect inner state and a type of faculty. That means all the instrumentations of the soul, all the instrumentation of the soul that Sri Aurobindo talked in the final pages of Synthesis of Yoga. Yeah, under that fourth chapter, which is perfection of yoga of self-perfection, brought with it the perfect inner state and faculty, out of which is right principles of action and the right spiritual and divine result. You see, each of these terms are absolutely pregnant because Sri Aurobindo is not giving a single loose end when he's saying. No sentence of his has got a loose end. So he says everything, the state of the being and its faculties have to be addressed and taken care of and elevated, upgraded. And then when that is done, then only work can be done properly, the way he wants us to do. Otherwise, he will say the first sentence, most of the people work as work only and not as yoga. That is the position. So yoga in the context of this phrase means God union. Generally, yoga means passing to consciousness, to God consciousness from our limited mental consciousness, and this ascent passes through many levels. So this ascent to the God consciousness passes through many levels, and the levels are different for what was for Sri Krishna and what is for Sri Aurobindo. We have seen that. We have read it in Bhagavad Gita, we have read it in Sri Aurobindo's texts. As one climbs, the bondage caused by our ignorance becomes more feeble, weakens. All outward material action. Now, this is a very important terminology of definition of work. A very important. There are definitions in Bhagavad Gita. We are addressing that in subsequent places. It is all outward material action, a thing without a self-existent reality. All outward material action is a thing without self-existent reality. Action is effected only as the outflow and physical symbol of mind. The sentence continues, I have split it because so that it settles down in us. It has no inherent model of spiritual value, but is capable only of bearing such values as are put on it by the Manomaya Purusha. Therefore, Tyaga, the inner renunciation, is preferable to sannyas, the physical renunciation. Why Sri Krishna advocates Tyaga and not sannyasa throughout that chapter 3, 4, 5 is here in this language Aurobindo has explained. Why is Tyaga and not sannyasa? Now, let us see one of the supporting statement of him is outer renunciation freeing us from life. Outer renunciation, that means when you go out into the mountains and stay in the cave. Outer renunciation freeing us from life, but not freeing life for us. It is not freeing life from us, for us. But the inner renunciation leads us through our real nature as mental beings, take account of our strength, and teaches us to insist upon it and realize its perfection in God. That means if I do the renunciation, I'm freeing myself from life. I'm not allowing life to impact me because I'm sitting in a cave or in a room and not interacting with anyone. But that is not going to help me. But this is but not freeing life for us. I should be able to use life the way I want, not about my life, but I must live it the way I want to live. So he's saying that outer renunciation, this is the greatest drawback. So how to do the work? Bhagavad Gita says, offer whatever you do to me. Anything that you do, yat karoshi, asnasi, jadoishi, dadati, yat tapasyasi, kaunteya, tat guru madhakar. Please give, offer that to me. When he says me in Bhagavad Gita, he is not talking about give it to Krishna. He is saying give it to the transcendent supreme. Now, this and the previous statement absolutely harmonize this. All work done in an egoistic spirit, however good for people in the world of ignorance, is of no avail to the seeker of the yoga. So, we have seen that most greatest impediment, he is saying, is the egoistic spirit that we cannot get rid of. And work done in an egoistic spirit, however good it may be, for the people of the world. That means I may do something egoistically, I may donate some money to something. Now that is of no use for, for the path of yoga. This is the difference. That all work done in an egoistic spirit, if I do it egoistically, however good for people in the world, it may be good for the people. But if it is done with that, then it is not good for the seekers of the yoga. Suppose we are going somewhere, we see some person is not been able to walk, we give a lift in the car. I may be doing in some kind of a intention. And Sri Aurobindo is very critical about it, very, very critical. He says, please make sure that you are not masking your ego by doing something and that is not egoistic. You may be doing it out of egoistic motive, but your ego is masked. That you have to detect and do it in a different way. But what does Sri Krishna mean by skill? This term is to be understood. The ingredients of it, the whatever thing goes on to make us a good worker, a divine worker, we'll see it comes slowly. It is the skill means it is the perfect adaptation of his soul and its instruments to the rhythm of the divine and the universal spirit. While his nature is not tied down in egoism. That when nature is not tied down in egoism, and under that condition, if the soul adapts, soul and its instruments, souls and its instruments adapts to the rhythm of the divine, then that work is being done skillfully. So he told Arjuna, work skillful. That means your soul and the instruments of your soul must be doing that work of which the divine has the need, not you have the need. And in mother's prayers and meditation, there's a wonderful prayer of her, whose one or two lines she says, whole page is there, somewhere in the bottom one third. She says, let me be an instrument of which you have the need. Let not me have that need. Let not be the instrument for my need. What instrument, what work you need, please use it in that. Mhm. So, this is what is skill. How to do it is the problem. A perfect adaptation is got to be done. Now, nature has its own rhythm, and this nature does not mean the outside nature, nature inside. The nature has its own rhythm. One has to align with that symphony, and that has to be perfectly matched and done. Then comes the aspect of fruits and the source of work. So Sri Krishna says, Ma phaleshu kadachana. Never look for fruits. And also don't be attached to results, which is coming later, but not in this sloka. And then he says, from where, what is the source of karma that you are doing? Karma means the karma that we do, not the karma in sense of what we do here and get a consequence of it later. Karma pramod bhava. That means karma has been born out of Brahman. This Brahman in the Bhagavad Gita is the Shara Brahman, not the Akshara Brahman and not the Brahman of the Upanishad, but it is the Shara Brahman of Bhagavad Gita from which this karma has come. This is uh, the source of karma, and this is how broadly work is to be done. So this is the a kind of a what I have so far said is more or less a policy decision. Policy matters have been stated by Sri Aurobindo and the Bhagavad Gita. That these are the policies, these are the principles on which you have to do. So the process of doing this has got to flow out of it. Like from the policies you make rules and all that in any organization. Similarly, from this is the policy statement. And then, so anything that is flowing out of it now will be how a work is to be done, what are the important ingredients in that, that is to be uh, imbibed in us. So now we know the vast dimensions of the script statement of yoga is skill in work. What is this dimensions of it? How vast is the definition of yoga and the skill and the work? So if we break down this, we find that a special inner states are needed for skill in action. That means our state of being in us, the faculties of power, will, and temperament, these all have to be addressed. So this actually flows from the previous policy statement that Sri Aurobindo has made. A state of being. What is our state of being? Our state of being, we more or less know, but we also have to know what is the state of being to which we have to arrive at. So we let us see. So these are the 5 dimensions, maybe the domains in which we have to approach and address each one of them. The lower four, Sri Aurobindo is interested in synthesis of yoga. Most aptly, the state of being is also addressed there, but more adequately and completely in life divine. Now, let us attempt a gap analysis. Gap analysis is what? Gap analysis is the term we use in the management, that what is the present state of a particular organization and where it is required to go. Suppose the Prime Minister says we have to get back to the economy. We have to get to the economy. So the gap is still filled. So how do what do I have to do to come up with fulfilling? That's what gap analysis. So here we have to do a gap analysis between us and the state in which what the Aurobindo wants us to be. So let us broadly see what is this gap. How does divine working happen? Now, divine working, how does it happen? Fundamentally, right from the beginning, absolutely from fundamentals, if you look at it. What do we do arises from what we are. We cannot do something which is not in us. So what we do arises out of what we are. The existent is conscious of what he is. And that consciousness formulates itself as a nomination power. This we know very, we have read it 100 times. That consciousness formulates itself into knowledge and power. And the existent itself is conscious of what it is. Now, the divine existence is pure and unlimited. It is certain. Whatever it puts forth in its limitless purity of self-awareness, as we already know, is truth of itself. And that is Satyam. So from Sat comes the Satyam. Divine existence, which is Sat, puts forth what is Satyam. You see the famous Vedantic statement, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. That Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma is actually objective aspect of Satchidanand. Satchidanand is the subject. If it is subjective aspect, its objective aspect is Satyam Jnanam Anantam. Now that Satyam is projected from that Satyam. The divine knowledge is knowledge of the truth. The divine will is power of the truth. Divine knowledge is the knowledge of the truth, and divine will is the power of the truth. And the divine workings has to follow from the will and knowledge. Knowledge will know what is to be done, and will does what it already knows it to be done. So there is no gap in that place in the divine working. So he says, the divine workings are words and ideas of the truth realizing themselves in the manifold forms and through many stages and in infinite relations. So this is how the work gets done. Work happens. Work flows in this fashion. And in Bhagavad Gita also, one of the shlokas, there it also says that work is actually a visarga. That means it is allowed to flow out. Visarga is to flow out. So work is actually externally flowing out from us. Anything that flows out from us is work, simply stated. So this is how divine work takes place. If this is how divine work takes place, the gap analysis would be where we are. Now to understand this particular statement, I have slightly paraphrased it in the next slide, which is this. So we can get that because this is the place we have to arrive. Satyam is the projection or objectification of Sat. We have seen that. Knowledge of the truth is divine knowledge. When the ideas of Satyam are realized in various forms, we call it divine work. So the definition of divine work is when the ideas of the truth are realized in various forms. It can be any form, physical form, vital form, mental form, aesthetic form, any type of form. That is work. So to do that kind of a work, we have to know the Satyam. The knowledge utilizes the knowledge and the will of the truth. The knowledge which is the work is done as per the divine, in the divine state, is using Chit Shakti. Obviously, the working can happen infinitely in time and space. So there will be no difficulty in executing that. See, Aurobindo says that whatever existence puts forth in its limitless purity of awareness is truth itself. So whatever it whatever it puts forth, whether it is you like, you don't like, it is opposing you or not opposing you, that is truth. In fact, at one state, he says, very interestingly and very revealingly, and absolutely targeted statement he gives, he says that if there is something which is supporting you, somebody or some idea is supporting you, and there is somebody and something is opposing you. If you think, if you are doing correct work, if you are doing correct work and doing proper work, you must know that the divine is there and divine is also here. So don't think that this is, which is opposing me, is not divine. And we always do that mistake. We always do this mistake. So he says, limitless purity of self-awareness puts up everything correctly and truly. Now, what is human state of being? This is what divine does. How is the things that we do? What we do, obviously, as it was stated earlier, I'll go back to that slide. What we do arises out of what we are. So, what we do arises out of what we are. I can't do anything different from what I am now. What I am, I can only do that. So that is where the Svabhava and Swadharma comes. What we do arises out of what we are. Now, as opposed to the divine working, the human acts are like this. Man is a particular working. It is not a limitless working in any time and space. Now, man is a particular working. That means when the universal is particularized in me, then it becomes that limited. And then so my work will be there. In a particular instant of time and space, it is not infinitely and eternally spread. His environment too is small subset. His knowledge, power, energy has no binding truth. His very existence is valid based on reflection from above. Now, you see, the last statement is very interesting, and we need to do a lot of work. We should understand to understand the greater import of it, especially those who have studied chakras Drisya Viveka, about 30, 67 or 63 slokas are there, that actually deals with this aspect of reflection. A very interesting study. Uh, we should do that sometime. Now, that means our ego, simply stated, it means our ego itself is a vritti, you know, vritti that we have read in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, uh, Yoga Chitta Vritti Virodha. Our ego itself is a vritti. This definition of linking Chitta Vritti Nirodha and Vritti with ego explains beautifully how Sri Aurobindo says uh, how ego is to be handled. We must have read ego is to be dissolved, and somewhere we must have read ego must be transformed. What is it? How is that the same man? Sri Aurobindo says ego is to be dissolved and ego is to be transformed. So this is to be this can be understood with this insight that the you see the form of ego is to be dissolved. Ego sense, form of the ego sense is to be dissolved. And the being of the ego is to be transformed by true being. The being of the ego is to be transformed with the true being, but its ego sense is to be dissolved. In Savitri we have read no? the 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 island joins the continent. At one stage in Secret Knowledge, I think, he says the island must join the continent. When the island joins the continent, what has happened is the ego sense has gone out. So ego sense is to be dissolved, but ego, the being of the ego is to be transformed by true being. That, that being has to go, the true being must occupy that space. So this is the big job that is to be done. This is the big job that is to be done. This tells us what is the gap. If each one we focus, we know how small we are and the distance to be covered. What is the length? So we just want to know this much in today's talk that even in the path of yoga, a path of works which we take so lightly, we think only meditation, etc., and puja and upasana, etc., is the only way. But Sri Aurobindo says, no, my boy, this is also the way. So, and he's telling us how difficult it is. So don't underestimate it. Unless man universalizes, he will falter at every step. This is the very first major step to be covered by us. Our present human state has a plethora of drawbacks. Primary among them is ego. And ego has got so much more things. Now, we will see ego and shortly, because we have read quite a lot, all of us have read much about ego. We'll see ego, and then we come to other elements that is going to contribute or are the posing the stumbling blocks for us. Now, this is our ego is only a face of the universal being. Our ego is only a face of the universal being and has no separate existence. Our apparent separative individuality is only a surface movement, and behind it, our real individuality stretches out to unity with all things and upward to oneness with the transcendent, divine, infinite. So, thus, our ego, which seems to be a limitation of existence, is really a power of infinity. This multiplicity of beings in the world is a result and signal of evidence, not of limitation or finiteness, but of illimitable infinity. So he is saying here in the second portion that look, this our ego is seems to be a limitation, but it is actually a power of infinity. The infinity, when it wanted to project ourselves, project things, then it needed creation of this ego so that it could do some tweaking here and there that was necessary. So that is why it is said that ego is a helper and ego is also a bar. A particular state for doing it, like you building a house, building a structure, you need scaffoldings. Now, the scaffoldings is a limitation when we see this, but the scaffoldings are necessary earlier to construct it. So, similarly, ego was necessary. And when the building is strong, concrete is strong, the roof is laid, then the scaffoldings can be removed. The I, the little ego, is a constituted by nature and is at once a mental, vital, and physical formation. So we have got a mental ego, vital ego, and a physical ego. And it meant to centralize and individualizing the outer consciousness. Our outer consciousness needs to be centralized. Otherwise, we'll be like a flux moving all around. When the true being is discovered, the unity of the ego is over, and so it can then disappear. And the true being is felt in its place. Kindly note this. He is saying the utility of the ego is over and the potential is to disappear. There is a disappearance. And the true being is felt in its place. So that is that in one case, the ego sense is got to be dissolved. The animal must join the continent, as I said in Savitri, and also the true being is got to be occupying that particular throne, which now ego is occupying, and that is by transformation. Ego is a very curious thing and is nothing more than its way of hiding itself and pretending it is not the ego. So there is plenty of writing of Sri Aurobindo, letters of yoga and individual writings to Dilip Kumar and Nagin Doshi, those who are not included in the letters of yoga. There you find that how this pretension takes place. Once, just I will give what time we have to close? 6:30. Okay. Somebody complained that look, I'm not been able to proceed because the force is not coming forward. So Sri Aurobindo said it's wrong understanding by you. It is your ego is not allowing the force to come forward. You are not detecting that ego, you are blaming the force. The ego is pretending in that case. And it's formatted as a disappear. The true meaning is very different. What does it happen? Yeah, yeah. Sometime back I slightly touched upon it. Now, I will use an interesting understanding. If you reach here also, you will see that some places the ego must disappear, must dissolve, must do this, which is basically like this. But also, they say ego must be constant. Now, if it's to dissolve and disappear, how is it that it is also give transfer? How is it transformation between the two? Literally, what should I transform? Now, he talks about Even like he says, ego sense is in the letter. It is in the letter. Ego sense is to be dissolved. But the being of the ego is to be transformed. Now you can understand this. And that is why I said, if you read the Vivek is a Vivek, which is a very which talks about this aspect in seven very soon aspect. He talks about the ego aspect. This ego is the way where that is not in the concept. Okay? Now, when I'm looking at it, there's a mystery in my mind. It is not only external object, it is also subjective object and also are different. You're getting it? You're getting it? If subjective aspect also is different, then the ego is the now what is ego? What is the vertical? On the surface of the ocean. It has got a shape and it has got a content. What is content? See, right? What is the content of ego self? Which is the way it is consciousness itself. So the ego self is filled by the stuff of consciousness, which is your and mind. So that that shape of the way has got this problem. So that ego self is separate. But whatever being of the ego, that's a lot. The true being has to be true being is like in its place. Only one minute, dissolving the masturbate plan. No, you are transforming the being of the ego. You see, ego doesn't every your impact ego set that down. There are various ego related stuff, ego idea, ego sense, ego feeling, ego feeling. We are talking about ego self. The sense of it, the sense of the ego has to go. And the being of it, the number of withdrawal, the type coming from the so that matter this is emphasizing two facets of it emphasizing. This is a very pertinent question you have asked, and it is to be understood if you read this these separate letters, which are not in the letters of the yoga, but books published, you know, with various people here discussed, which are not published in the letters of yoga, but they are contained in the published book. You will find them. This I will send it to you if I can rediscover in a couple of days. The realization of I am that is true, but we, as of now, cannot safely proceed on it unless we realize also that all is that. So everything is that. I can't say I am that. You also have to say you also know that you are that. So I cannot think that I am that isolating you. So both must be realized. It is true for me, it is true for you, true for the trillions. So the finite is one of multiplicity, and its action is only seizable by supreme reason, which regards all and acts as a one awareness that observes itself in difference and in respect of its own differences. And so this term in Bhagavad Gita, which comes, is the last word. Ekattvena and Prithatvena. Ekattvena and Prithatvena means as one and as different. It is a one that is many. So in our own principle of conduct, we have to realize that it is the self is all. on which we have to found a unity of action and a harmonious diversity of action. Both have to be, both have to be. So there is a unifying truth within the diversity of action. So self of all should be the basis. Now, state of our present being, we are still doing the gap analysis. We are still doing that gap analysis. What is the difference between divine working and our working? Okay, with the state of our present being is, if the individual has no independent self-existence, no independent truth, no independent force. It bases itself on a reflected image of the universal. This is the Chandrasekhar, this is the reflection I was talking about. What is reflected? Uh, it bases itself on the reflected image of the universal. The answer lies in aligning and conforming to the universal. So all our efforts to be at the initial stage should be to be in line with the universal. But is that sufficient? No. So Aurobindo says that is not enough. It is only a step closer. We have gone moved closer. Now, why it is not enough? He says that even the universal is deficient. You are deficient. You are able to find. You can do the universal that means the universal itself is not it's a process of resistance, what. See, the next step is to go to the transcendent. Till you go, you are limping. So, but the universal has derived its truth from the transcendental. So the universalized mind must look up from the cosmic consciousness to the supramental consciousness. From the transcendental, it has now to derive its new state of being. So we are only talking about that first of the 5 fingers I have shown. First finger was state of being. So this state of being has to come from the transcendental. So from the individual we go to perspective transcendental. Now we come to the faculties slightly. We'll migrate in our discussions towards the faculties. The state of being of a yogi is based on the rock of equality of soul. So you cannot be unegoistic, unseparative, unless we have the equality. This is also stated everywhere. Samatya yoga uchyate in the Gita, he says. This equality is so large, that means we have to become so that large, that all action in the universe, the yogi sees as arising in this being out of the divine existence and under the stress of divine truth, knowledge, will, and all. So you see, this yogi sees that as those all actions arising in this being out of the divine existence and under the stress of divine truth, knowledge, and will. So he has to see that this universal action is coming out of that universal universe with whom he has identified. As a result, the yogi's knowledge as well as power increases immensely. How does he become a skillful worker? He becomes a skillful worker through this graded scale. So what will be our next step? Our only business, what will be our business? Our only business is to prepare success for a true and careful action and to offer it, if it comes, to the Divine Master. We'll come on this more under a particular portion, which is delight of action. So now we see that not only state of being is required, and active consciousness is required. That means static and dynamic. We need to have both. So more knowledge and more power is required. So we go from ego to the individual, individual to cosmic, cosmic to the supreme. And then more knowledge and more power becomes under us. So this is how static aspect and dynamic aspect is built in. Uh, this is the unique aspect of your. So now, as I mentioned a while back, that the top one, which is blanked out in that five fingers, state of being, we have addressed. We are now going to talk primarily on the other four, which is the faculty and instruments. Truth, knowledge, will, and thought. But here, Sri Aurobindo says the single all important factor for all these is equality. Unless we have the equality, sense of equality brought in, developed in us with extremely hard work, it will not be possible. What we are, our body is a knot in matter, and life, eddy of life, mind, a will in the universal mind. So we are no way separated from the universe. We are no way separated from the universe. Body is a knot of matter, and life is a part of that life, universal life, L capital. Mind is a part of universal mind. Our force is every other being's force. So I don't have an independent force. Nobody has an independent force. Knowledge is a glimmer from the light that belongs to none. So, so oneness is the central factor. Unless we move towards that oneness, we cannot be a divine worker. What then is our human work? If this is what we are, as we discussed, what are the deficiencies in us, then what becomes of work that flows out of us? It must be executed free from error of our personality. The work is to be done for divine. For this, a perfect equality is required. It cannot be otherwise done. Now, what this equality means? Equality is a term of consciousness which brings into the whole of our being and the nature the eternal tranquility of the infinite. Now, this tranquility that is a part of the infinite, only when that comes into us perfectly and properly, then only in our being, in us means our being, a soul and nature, then we can say that our consciousness has achieved again equality. So Sri Krishna says, Yogastha Guru Karmani Sangata Dhananjaya Siddha Siddha Samobhuta Samattam Yoga Uchate. And Sri Aurobindo says, equality is the chief support of the true spiritual consciousness, and it is this from which the sadhak deviates when he allows a vital movement to carry him away in the feeling or speech or action, whichever, mentally, vitally, physically. When he deviates from that, he is like that. What does equality mean? More elaborations. Equality means a quiet and unmoved mind and prayer vital. It means not to be touched or disturbed by whatever happens around. And what is it that uh, one has to progress through this without being turmoil? Why is equality needed? To change the whole substance of our being into substance of the self. To replace our present confused action into a self-possessed and luminous work of the free spirit. And If we have not equality of spirit and in the motive forces of our nature, a divine action is impossible. So divine action is impossible if it is not, we don't have equality in our force and effort. The divine deals with all as self of all. So he is dealing with all as he is as his own person. And if that is so, if I don't deal with you in that fashion, I'm not in line. He moves all as per his large aim and draws the soul upward in the evolution. The individual who seeks to be one in will with divine and make his nature an instrument of the divine purpose must enlarge himself, his faculties, into a supreme equality. So the result of the faculty perfection, you will have annihilation of desire, conquest of soul's equality, and abolition of evil. Each will be supporting like a locked gear. It will be supporting each other and augmenting each other, one leading to the improvement of the other. Now we come to an interesting aspect of Sri Aurobindo's writings, delight of work. In delight of work, he says we have three things in us. We are the instrument, we are the worker, and we are the master of works. I am the instrument, I am the worker who wields that instrument, and I am the master of work for whom the work is being done. All three are in me. All three are me. And so, this is something which is beyond Bhagavad Gita. So, everything is inside. I am containing all three. The master, the worker, the instrument. And they move inwards. As an instrument, the sword does not choose whom to strike. A sword in a battlefield does not choose whom to strike. But he says, be like a sword. It has got the joy of the battle. If choice mars the working, suppose you have released an arrow. Krishna Prem says this in one of his writings. That if you have released an arrow, this arrow, as it is going towards its target, if it deviates of its own, what happens? It's not an instrument that you have released. It's not an instrument that you have released. So you are not an instrument anymore. Take delight in own appointed work as per the nature. The instrument is finite in a personal image. Sorry, there are two images. In a personal image. And we'll go to the next one. We cannot, as a role, as a worker, our nature is our worker. My nature in me is the worker. The instruments that I have got, that means the instrument that we have, the eyes, karmendriya, gyanendriyas, antakaran, etc., all these things are instruments. As per Sankhya, they're jada, unless they get the reflected consciousness. So our nature is the worker. This nature is also all nature. This nature self is not only ours, It is this that has made the sun, the earth. But actually, it is an original self knowledge, infinite force. But in us, it is the proper nature and individual energy as contained in my encasement. Now, even though individualized, the man uses the universal force and knowledge for his work through his individualized mode. Through the individualized mode, this universal energy is in me, just like this whole space is enclosed in this building. We are saying this space, this lecture hall, but if you demolish these walls, it merges with the rest of the energy. So this is a temporary construction. So this mold of mine is an individualized mold of which is actually encased, limited to this for a purpose. But the worker is required to make his works for himself and not for others, and has to be delivered free from error. That means once I have entrapped the energy in me or the force and power in me, I have to treat it as if it is my power, not be egoistic about it. It has got to be now expressed through my Sambhava and Sadharma and make, uh, but the worker is required to make works for person. Therefore, it is not working. Not I mean, and it has to be delivered free from it. So there is no scope of egoistic error or anything else. And the worker has the joy of her works and the joy of a lover for whom she works. She knows herself to be his consciousness and his force, knowledge, his unity, and his self division. Know thyself also to be these things. Take thou also the delight of that lover. The worker is universal with a personal trend. Now, the worker is an individual with a personal trend. If you like to mind, there is one of a chapter where he has, in one page, in two paragraphs, he has described the universal, individual, and the transcendental. How the universal, how individual is a in a in a is contained. The universal, which is contained in a small container, is individual. So here it is saying the worker is a universal with a personal trend. So he has that personal trend is there, but he cannot forget that he is an universal. Neither the instrument nor the worker is the master. For neither is the true person. None of them are the true person. Who is the master now? No last, the master to be thyself. You are also the master. But to this self, put no form. Be one with that in thy being. Then before an opening eye within, there shall emerge that true and only person. The joy of the master possessed, there is nothing else for thee to conquer. So the delight of the master is God, and the delight of worker is God, and the delight of instrument is God. The way it has to be God, with the purity, with the sincerity, then there is nothing else to be conquered. So that this can be depicted. The instrument and the worker and the master, they are all intertwined. They uh, initially are separated, misunderstood, gradually they become to overlap, and we ultimately see that they are one as if concentric circles. So They are present in a simultaneous. Now, having reached there, what does what is the work to be done? What should be the state of the yogi? Now, in a wonderful sloka in sixth chapter, Sri Krishna says, now when you are climbing the hill, you have uh, work to be done. But one who has climbed the hill, the peak, what is he required to do? He says, Yoga Rudhasya Taseva Samaha Karanam Uchyate. He has to be Sama. Sama means peaceful, tranquil, uh, absolutely contained. That will be the situation he will arrive at. Now we are coming back, as I said, that particular sloka of Rig Veda. We will come back to that particular sloka. I said we revert back to this sloka again. What is the import of that sloka? Is this import of that sloka? You roughly recall that Varuna's thing that if you remember that thing, he said it is spread everywhere from the top to bottom. Everything flows downward. By yoga, Varuna is born in us, the vast sky of spiritual living, the divine in his wide existence and infinite truth into the vastness. Mitra rises up, Lord of light and love, who takes all our activities. Now, these things are happening when we are growing. This Mitra, Bhava, all inside us. All are inside us. They are not only staying somewhere in the remote levels above, they are inside us. So Mitra rises up, similarly, the divine bliss and all-seizing joy who dispels the evil dream, they all rises up in us. And then Arjuman's power, Mitra's love and light, and Varuna's unity. This divine birth shall be the sun of our works. This is what Sri Aurobindo says. This divine birth shall be the sun of our work. And than creating this, that greater skill can there be, or what more practical and sovereign cunning. This is what Sri Aurobindo says in Secrets of Veda. Now, this has been beautifully equated Krishna Prem in one of the slokas. Yogi Krishna Prem very interestingly links this verse of Rig Veda with Ashwatha tree of Katha Parishad, where it is Uddhamila Madhasya. Both. Once we read that interpretation in Katha Upanishad of this Rigvedic sloka as seen by Krishna Prem, we can now very well infer the link when we see Varuna as God who creates path for the sun in our being so that all else can follow. So all that, the Arhaman, the Pavra, the Mitra, Varuna to rise in us, the rock that is part of the sun, that is created the path, Varuna creates the path, the sun, in our being, so that all else can follow. So everything else is thereafter follow. So, yeah. Should I read out? This is very this is from this is Secrets of Veda. I paraphrased. That's why I didn't put it in blue because it is paraphrased. That I think here. The ability required the individual is taught by following the yes. For that, you do yoga, yoga. That is inner self. We do the inner self, right? This is why actually what we are doing on this plane and what no people are doing for me. In fact, this work and bring up once they make up this Mitra, I don't know appears in that. The indwelling here the word is very clear. Indwelling part. The indwelling is not out there. So these parts are unless you do that. So it is practically is not right. This is you do not have to you analyze the process in your mind. You do not have to you do not have to how can I develop it? How can I have it without waking them up? So, there is a slogan written in Veda, which catches me to very interestingly highlighted in all the classes that we used to attend. And so he used to say that it's very blind activity of being not impacted by anything. And both Athena are meant to be taken of being led by us. So, um, that is required to be done. There is no shortcut to that. And Krishna Prem says this. Now, going beyond all this, Veda and Bhagavad Gita, we come to exclusive extension of Sri Aurobindo. I'll just take 5 more minutes. Vaishali. Overmind, we know, is a part of ignorance. We know overmind is a part of ignorance. This is the highest level of knowledge in which ignorance can climb. This is the definition of how far the ignorance can go. Beyond that, there is no ignorance. Beyond overmind, there is no ignorance. This knowledge is still divided and knowledge of parts and not the integral knowledge. It can bring subjective transformation. The instruments are transformed to the extent that they can work for the cosmic divine, while the self within remains calm, free, and united with divine. Nature remains imperfect and self does not mind them. See, this is the state in which you and I. Nature has remained imperfect and self is not much worried about it. Self is not bothered. Self let self let them remain. Nature remain imperfect. Like in we probably this obviously also if somebody moves like this should avoid the fact you may ask him where is the other half of me? Other half of elected by ourselves, which is talking here. Nature remains imperfect and the self does not mind them. The inner being, down to the inner physical, can also become free. Inner being, down to the inner physical, can also become free. This much can be done, attained in the overmind level. So, ignorance is there. Subjective transformation has taken place. Outer transformation has not taken place. Inner being, down to the inner physical, can also become free. So, inner being has become free, outer being hasn't become free. This is the state that is attainable there. Once supplemental exist, the perception of nature are shredded. The truth consciousness descends into the being, including the outer being, which was left out earlier. Here the ego vanishes completely, means ego sense vanishes completely. The instruments and all the faculties are upgraded. The physical eye, this is the last slide on which I'd like you to focus. It is very interesting in the context of many things. Physical eye seems then to carry in itself a spirit and a consciousness which sees not only the physical aspect of the object, but the soul of quality in it, the vibration of energy, the light and force and spiritual substance of which it is made. The physical eye sees all this under supramental condition. There is at the same time a subtle change which makes the sight see in a sort of fourth dimension, the character of which is certain internality, the seeing not only of the superficies and the outward form, but of that which informs it and subtly extends around it. The material object. And on this portion, we have had very repeated, detailed discussions in our classes. And some of you, those who have attended those classes, Meena and Neelam, you would have remember that. The material object becomes to the sight something different from what we now see, not a separate object on the background or in the environmental of the rest of the nature, but an indivisible part of, even in a subtle way, an expression of the unity of all that we see. So, see, Aurobindo, under the chapter, the matter, either in the matter or the not of matter, there are two chapters. One of these two chapters, he writes, the matter is not that what it appears to us. That means this matter, as it appears to me, it is actually not so. And he discusses in two paragraphs as to why it is so. And this aspect from a letter that he has written to somebody, or it is, I think, the archives somewhere it is there. Material object becomes to the sight something different from what we now see at the supramental level. At the supramental level, we see what precisely it is, not what it appears now to our impure instrument. The material object becomes to this sight something different from what we see, not a separate object on the background or in the environment of the rest of the nature, but an indivisible part and even in a subtle way an expression of the unity of all that we see. So even in the supramental sight, Sri Aurobindo is saying that you will be able to see the unity even through the objects dispersed and deployed differently at different places. There will be no discontinuity. This pillar and this laptop would be one integral material, which is joined up here like this, joined up there like that. So this will be, and so the actions can be such that the one manifests as it wills all the time. With this, I come to the close of my presentation. I've taken 10 minutes extra. Sorry for that.